6:30. And
It's no big
this
deal for
being
me.
a
I don't
meeting
mind.
that was to start at 6:30, we're going to bring to order the meeting of the November 20th Chelmsford Planning Board. I just wanted to start with a couple things. One is that we are having both this and the work session here because there were some public requests for the meeting to be televised and Zoom for our work session. That doesn't necessarily mean that people will have an opportunity to speak. I just want to say that out of the gate. This is going to be us making a plan of how we're going to address the regulations for the ADU in the work session. That's one of our topics. So anyway, this being the general regular meeting, starting at 6:30, this meeting, it will be recorded and televised for participation of people who aren't present in the room. But should the recording go down, we'll continue the meeting as long as we're able to. First up, we have public input, which shall be limited to statements that are from the public and not pertaining to anything that's currently the subject of a public hearing, but that's under our jurisdiction as the Chelmsford Planning Board. So first, is there anyone who'd like to participate in public input? Okay, nobody on Zoom?
No.
So seeing none, we'll start up with 9 Progress Avenue, minor site plan review.
Good evening. My name is Jeffrey Brem. I'm the engineer for Fabiana Gamaris, who's right here. She's Granite Plus. I submitted a letter. I don't know if the letter is in front of you or not, but I'm going to basically go through the letter and tell you what we're planning at 9 Progress Ave. So Granite Plus of America is a countertop fabricator. They've been in business in Chelmsford since 2014. Their business is doing well, and they need to expand a little bit, mainly to put some of the new equipment inside a building. If you've ever been to a granite fabricator, they bring in granite and quartz, and then they take orders and they cut the holes for the sink and attach the sinks and so forth to the cabinetry, to the counters, ship it off to the job sites and install it. And that's Fabiana's business. So I've submitted the plan, which you'll see in a minute. Let's bring that plan up if you can, Evan.
Yep.
So 9 Progress Ave, that is basically the large square is the existing building. It used to be Aquatech, for you old Chelmsford people that remember the pool company that was there. I live in Carlisle. My pool was an Aquatech pool, so back in the 70s and 80s, this was their office. So they have a front portion that acts, basically the entire site is impervious right now. What you see is the building is the large square, and our new proposed addition in the back, 2,916 square feet, is on this. Underneath that right now is pavement. And then they have display granite and storage all around on the pavement outside. So they're just taking some of that pavement, building a small addition so that they could put equipment inside to do the cutting and fabricating. So my note says the property is presently and will continue to be in allowed use in the existing 1A district, or IA district, as a contractor shop indoor for storage, fabrication, delivery, and installation of quartz, granite, and other countertops. The existing building is 8,008 square feet, concrete block building, flat roof, on 1 acre at 9 Progress Ave. This is an industrial subdivision, if you haven't been there. It's behind one of the nursing homes. I'm going to say the wrong name if I pick it, but just off 129. The exterior has some overhead doorways. In the rear of the building, there are 2 overhead doorways, and we're just moving. Those doorways will be closed off, obviously, with the addition, and they're just going to move in the same location in the new addition. Same with a couple of man doors. From a site perspective and the impact perspective, this is probably the lightest impact you can have on a property since it's already all paved, it's all impervious, there's no change to the drainage pattern, no change to the impervious cover computation, essentially no change to what you normally would consider. There's no change in the parking layout or anything. They're having the same number of employees, so they just want to build an addition. It's kind of a glorified plot plan, if you will. The use is, like I said already, it's a allowed use. It's not changing. And a 2916 square feet addition is less than the 3,000 square feet that you have, so it's a minor site plan per section 195-104G. And we're here hopefully tonight to obtain approval so that she could build the shop and bring some new equipment in that she's already ordered.
You should have some letters,
Oh, I'm sorry, should I go through them, Evan?
I think.
Yeah, what would like me to do that, Madam Chair? So we have letters from the Fire Department, Fire Prevention Office, dear members of the board, regarding the application submitted for the site plan review for 9 Progress Ave, Granite Plus. This office finds the following: all pertinent codes, including but not limited to NFPA standards, MGL Chapter 148, 527 CMR 1, State Building Code and Town of Chelmsford bylaws must be conformed to for the design and construction of the proposed addition. Plans must be submitted to this office as part of the building permitting process for approval. Separate stamped fire protection plans, fire alarm, and sprinkler must be submitted separately for approval by an appropriately licensed professional. All inspections must be completed prior to use. Site plans depicting fire department access will also need to be submitted prior to approval. This office would approve of this project under these conditions, and we ask that you make this letter part of your approval process and public record. Signed, Josh Abbott, Captain, Fire Prevention.
And we have no problem with that letter.
And then we have from Public Works, from Sheila Joyce, Project Engineer. The Engineering Department has performed a review of the minor site plan application for 9 Progress Avenue, submitted for the applicant, Granite Plus of America. The following contents of the submission were reviewed for appropriateness of method and accuracy, as well as for compliance with Town of Chelmsford Stormwater Bylaw, Town of Chelmsford Stormwater Management Regulations, Division 3, Sewer Capacity and Connection Restriction. Minor site plan review, outstanding DPW engineering issues not addressed. Upon review of the minor site plan application submission, DPW has no outstanding site plan comments or concerns. For sewer comments, no increase to the Town of Chelmsford sewer infrastructure shall be more than 500 gallons per day. Project does not propose changes to sewer infrastructure or usage. Per the types of establishments listed in Title V, DPW identified 9 Progress Ave most closely as a factory, industrial plant, warehouse, or dry storage space without cafeteria, which allots 15 gallons per day per person. The site narrative states that from an operational perspective, no new employees are proposed. Recommended stormwater management conditions. Consideration shall be made to add roof drain dry wells to addition for the stormwater runoff from non-metal roofs as 9 Progress Ave is located within the Zone 2 wellhead protection area. This is not a requirement for approval. Recommended general conditions of approval. All materials within the public ways shall comply with town standards as set forth in the Town of Chelmsford DPW street opening, utility connections, rules, and regulations.
I don't think you need to read all
Okay,
of it.
that's
It was a
all.
boilerplate.
All right. And then from the police department, no concerns.
Nice, huh? That doesn't happen very often on the first go-round. We have no objections to any of the letters
Okay.
and the conditions therein.
Does anyone have any questions or comments for the applicant?
I have a couple of questions. Currently, it's a paved area. Is it marked for parking? Is it striped for parking right now?
No,
Or is this-
it's currently used for storage of materials, and there'll still be storage of materials inside the building.
So how is the stormwater handled for the paved surface? It's caught in catch basins, I presume, and then does it just go off-site?
It goes off-site. Some of it goes to the back against Route 3 into a little swale that was built when Route 3 was built, and a little bit of it goes in the front onto the street drainage.
And so now with the structure there, you'll be capturing the water through gutters, I presume, and then that's gonna, how are you gonna handle the stormwater for the additional?
Yeah, we didn't plan on any of the Joyce mentioned that, Sheila Joyce mentioned that she wants us to look into putting in some dry wells for that. We will look into that. I have to check with the architect as far as how the design of but I'm pretty sure there are currently 3 downspouts in the rear of the building. I think one of them will stay the same for the existing building. The new addition, we could probably put new downspouts and put those into the roof.
Do they
range.
just flow onto the pavement?
Yes,
and
they
be
do.
captured? Okay, okay, okay. All right, that's it.
Anita? Chris?
No.
Mike?
I'm with it.
John?
No questions?
Okay. Is there anyone from the public who has any comments or questions on the matter? Okay. I'll take a motion.
Sure. I would move to grant the minor site
How
plan.
about we close the,
There is no
Did we actually
There's no
open it?
vote.
There's no
Yeah.
public meeting.
No public hearing.
No
oh,
public
wait,
hearing on this.
Sorry. Go ahead.
Yeah, I would move that we grant the minor site plan.
Second?
Including all conditions as stated.
And we have a motion by Mike Raisbeck and a second by John Sousa. Excuse me. All in favor?
Aye.
Motion carries. Okay.
Thank you. I like the easy ones sometimes.
Yeah, I
So
wish
do
they
we.
were all, I wish they all were.
Okay. A little bit bogged down up here. My paper. Okay, next up, we have meeting minutes. Has everyone had a chance to review the minutes from October 23rd?
Is that one that we had already looked at and that was revised, I think?
Yep.
Yeah. and-
With the
okay,
votes.
We covered the revisions.
So it looked okay to me. Anyone else have any concerns? Okay. Next up, we have, so we don't have to vote, because we already voted on that, right?
No, we didn't.
No, I think we deferred it.
Okay,
Yeah, we
so
deferred
we do
that
need
one.
to vote. Sorry. Okay, I'll take a motion.
So moved?
Motion to accept the minutes from October 23rd, made by Mike, second
Second?
by John. All in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Carries. Okay, next meeting date we have is December 11th. Evan, what do we have on for December 11th?
December 11th, you have continuation of 4 Paylette is the only regulatory item. You received an email from Select Board member Virginia Crocker-Timmons. Today, I think, scheduling a joint meeting with the Select Board for December 23rd to discuss cannabis, retail only. So you may want to consider placing an agenda item on your December 11th meeting to have an initial conversation about that in preparation for that meeting
yeah.
on the 23rd. The only other item that I'm aware of is, as part of the Open Space and Rec Plan update, NIMCOG, who's serving as the consultant, they're required by law to present and obtain approval from the planning board. They want to schedule, I guess, an initial presentation with the planning board. And December 11th seems to be a good date to do that.
Okay. And then we also I haven't seen it in my box yet, but I might have missed it. We have to discuss we have to meet another joint meeting with the select board for appointing
The alternate.
an alternate.
That's scheduled
same
for
day.
December
The same
23rd
day,
as well,
okay, just,
The same day as what?
as the
12/23.
cannabis discussion.
Oh, okay.
23rd.
Can I just, I ask that the 11th, the meeting start at 7 PM,
I would love that,
just for the 11th?
yeah.
Yeah.
I don't have a
okay?
problem with that. Anyone else have a problem
No,
with that?
that's fine by
That's
me.
better for me.
Sounds like it's not gonna be bad.
Okay. So I'll take a motion
To,
Support.
To adjourn this meeting.
to adjourn the regular
And
meeting.
then move into the work session at 7 PM.
I move to adjourn the November 20th regular meeting and move into the work session.
Second?
Motion by Chris, second by Mike Raisbeck. All in favor?
Aye.
Okay. Now, we're going to open up the work session.
We have 8 minutes
I was
because
gonna say.
we scheduled that for start at 7 PM.
Oh, yeah, I
Want
was
to just
thinking that
adjourn
we,
till 7 PM?
it might start late.
Want to just take a recess for 8 minutes?
Well, I mean, we could actually, is there anything that would bar us from some initial conversation about the cannabis stuff? I mean,
Technically,
I
yeah,
would
it's
just-
not on our
It's
agenda.
not on our
not on our
agenda.
agenda, but it's,
Right, so,
then again,
I mean, you've already adjourned the regular meeting. I
Yeah.
would just
the hell with it.
take a recess for 7 minutes and
Yeah.
reconvene at 7 PM.
I would say it being 7 o'clock, we're going to open up the work session. And first on our agenda for the work session is the ADUs. There was a housing bond bill that was approved that takes effect on February 2nd that makes accessory dwelling units available as a by right option. They can't be, they have to be the size of less than half the square footage of the principal dwelling or 900 square feet, whichever is smaller, and they are unable to be unreasonably restricted by the municipalities. So the first thing I think we should maybe decide about is, I think we should also have probably this item put on our agenda for the December 11th meeting with an opportunity for some public input on this topic. And then I guess another thing I would like to have us decide is, like, how do we want to handle it in terms of, do we want to make the decisions, or do we want to have a subcommittee that makes the decisions, that proposes it to us? The way I see it, there's a few things that we need to decide. The first of which is the bill is meant to address what's proposed, what is pretty widely regarded as a dramatic housing shortage in Massachusetts. And this is an effort to kind of slowly, gradually increase the available units and hopefully lower cost units without, in the thoughts of the Commonwealth, dramatically changing the makeup of the town. I mean, I guess that's certainly open to discussion. But so we can choose as whoever makes this decision, whether it's us or a subcommittee, to kind of orient ourselves towards seeing that there's a need and being as open to the creation of ADUs as kind of the spirit of the bill expects or hopes, looks towards, or we can approach it with more of a, we want to restrict everything that we can restrict. I was at the Housing Advisory Board meeting yesterday, and it was interesting. There was Mike, was the representative that worked with us from NEMCOG on the MBTA, was there, and he handed out the strategic planning,
The feedback.
from the launching of the strategic plan on September 18th. It was just kind of a list of what people said. We broke into breakout tables, and everyone wrote down their table what they thought were the important issues. And so there was people that said there's not enough multifamily, we need more affordable housing, we need more housing in general. And then there was people saying there's too much multifamily. It was actually funny. Like, every list had the opposite sides of the equation. So I don't think it's clear, as far as, representing the townspeople, what the townspeople want. And I think that we should make an effort to glean that. And I also think someone raised the point, and I think it's a good one, that all of us here are homeowners. So we don't exactly have, we might not have a variety of viewpoints on the matter that might be relevant to this conversation.
I disagree. I manage a very large staff, and most of them are in their late 20s, early 30s. And for me to hire people, I'm very much aware of how much the housing prices cost and what these people are facing. So to assume just because I'm a homeowner, and I've been one for a very long time, that I don't understand it. I've got children who are young adults and who will be, graduating from college, looking for homes. So I don't think that's very fair. Like, I hear it all the time, because it becomes very difficult to, attract and retain employees if I don't have them living close by. So, like, I fully understand what is at stake. I also think we need to be careful because, I've got a question more so of how does sewer impact this? If you're adding an accessory dwelling unit, does that mean they hook up to our sewer? Like, or is that like?
Do you wanna run through the?
I got more questions about it rather
Yep.
than trying
Yeah,
to
I
solve
mean,
the social, economic
Yeah.
issue that the state's
So
failing.
Evan
facing.
has attended, that was my little
Yeah.
opening, and I think this meeting in general is not, we're not going to solve these questions tonight by any means. I think this is just kind of an opening conversation to identify what are the questions. And Evan has attended
Yeah.
a number of telemeetings where what the questions are has been introduced, and he kind of presented a little bit of that yesterday. I was hoping he could repeat that today.
Yeah, well, what I thought I'd do tonight is, I assume most board members have looked at the November 4th webinar, so I don't need to focus really on that. What I thought I'd do is just briefly run through the existing zoning provisions that are relevant. So the first one is the existing limited accessory apartment. It's 195, 6.1. That existing bylaw could be revised to be compliant. Some communities have done that. Others have chosen to delete and draft a new bylaw. The current bylaw, as we all know, allows LAAs within an existing single-family by right, building permit only. It allows new additions by special permit to the zoning board, and it does not permit anything related to detached. The next related zoning provision is 195-8, which is pre-existing non-conforming uses and structures. I mention this because this is critically important. If you recall, a couple years ago at town meeting, this was, the FAR and building coverage was in front of town meeting. This is directly relevant to ADUs. If the town chooses to not treat ADUs differently, meaning not exempt ADUs from the FAR and building coverage limitations, then any property that is undersized and that mathematically is capped based upon the FAR and the lot coverage percentages would continue to need to go to the zoning board. That zoning board process is separate and distinct from the ADU approval, because the zoning board would be providing zoning relief for FAR or lot coverage, mathematically not related to the specific use of the square footage. So that needs to be crystal clear and very well understood. And I can bring up those slides. We can talk more in detail about the mathematical limitations. But again, unless the town chooses to exempt ADUs from those mathematical limitations, then any property that is mathematically capped will continue to go to the zoning board. That would be for a special permit. There's some members of the zoning board here who can potentially speak to that process. The next section is 195-11, which is accessory buildings. This is also critically important. Currently, no accessory building, which a detached ADU would be by definition, is allowed in the front yard area. So that speaks to currently putting oversized sheds, oversized garages between your front door and the roadway. The theory being that the front yard is to be open and visible for aesthetic purposes. You don't want a structure in front of a structure. That same provision says that accessory buildings over 260 square feet are subject to the regular front, side, and rear setbacks. So anything over a large shed currently is required to comply with regular single-family setbacks. The reason that that's relevant is that, again, if we don't treat ADUs differently, then by default, they will be required to comply with this provision. And that speaks to whether the board and the town think that's a reasonable regulation or ADUs should be treated differently. Those setbacks for RB, a front is 40, side is 25, rear is 30. In the RC, front is 20, side is 12, rear is 20. Then
No,
just,
hold on a second.
Yep.
We can go there. So now, right, we have those same setbacks for single-family homes and stuff like that. And
For what?
Like for a regular single-family home, right? And if you, the process to get an exemption for that is you go through the ZBA, correct? So there is a process that.
Correct.
For those reasonable, there is a process to get an exemption from that if we do nothing, correct? I just want to make sure, like, okay.
Yeah,
Thank you.
just a point of clarification. So the ZBA handles the limited accessory apartments as a special permit, but the setbacks from that sort of thing, those are variances. And there's different criteria. The variances are much harder to establish. So just keep that in mind as well.
yeah, the variances only apply to conforming lots. The 195.8, again, any lot that is undersized and a building permit cannot be issued by right, automatically goes to the zoning board for a special permit. Variances are not required for dimensional setbacks unless you're creating a new encroachment, which would require a variance.
I throw a question up. I think it would be very valuable to know just what the exposure is here. Let us assume for the moment that we leave all of our setbacks and such things in place as they are. Do we have any idea how many lots in town would be by right buildable as opposed to special permit buildable for ADUs? That'll give us a notion of, in a sense, how big the issue is and how much work we need to go to relieve the problem. So do we have any of that kind of data, or can we get it?
Yeah, I know, former planning board member Nan Arroway looked at the assessor's database and has provided that information, so I can dig that email up. It's readily available. Upwards of 80% of all single-family lots are undersized. That in and of itself is not the critical piece of information. If you're 20,000 square feet and less, as shown on the slide here, that's where the mathematical limitations on FAR and building coverage begin to be a constraint.
And how
So-
many are 20,000 or less?
I don't recall
It's a
offhand.
bunch.
Yeah, I think
called
like,
Westlands.
I have the FAR piece of it, I think, I have an issue with that. Not, the building coverage is how much space it takes on
The
lot.
ground.
Right. The FAR is
Total gross square footage.
total gross square footage. Because I think that limits a lot of people from going up,
Yeah.
right? Like if you have a ranch and you want to add a second floor,
Yeah,
right?
then your
Like,
FIR goes
you
up. yeah.
can't, you run into, especially if you're on a small little lot, right? Like, I think that limits people adding the second floor. I do have concerns about if you're on a small lot and then allowing, like, going too close to the neighbors, right? Like, that makes it a city, right? If you got a bunch of, like, Westlands, we start playing around with that. But I wouldn't be opposed to changing the FAR percentage of it.
Or let me continue just briefly here. So, as it pertains to the new ADU law, as I understand the requirements, the first one has been clarified at the webinars. They are permitted by right anywhere single-family is permitted by right within a residential zoning district. And there's a slight
Yeah,
distinction there. For purposes of Chelmsford, the RA, RB, RC, and RM are the only zoning districts that allow single-family. They all happen to be residential zoning districts. The next one is, we cannot require more than one space per ADU. The next one is a shell. No more than one space can be required. So while the ADU may be a
Oh,
two-bedroom.
parking, we're talking parking?
parking,
Okay,
sorry,
No, no,
sorry,
I
sorry.
didn't understand.
The next one is a shall. If you, where two ADUs on one lot are being proposed, a special permit shall be required. That's right there within the law.
I thought, okay, so you can have multiple ADUs on a property?
The law allows for the opportunity, but it has to be, a special permit has to be obtained.
So the second one's not by right.
Correct, it's discretionary.
I thought it was only one up
It's a
to,
quirk, it's,
1,000
one
square
one
feet.
is by right,
yeah.
no more than 50% of the gross floor area of the existing house, or 900 square feet,
Whichever is smaller.
whichever is smaller. They did insert this opportunity to have two ADUs on one lot, but it requires a special permit.
Same size, too? As the.
Yeah, I think, it's not specific, but it seems that by default, it's
Some of
the
the-
same, the
some
same
towns in the
criteria would
state have-
apply.
Multiple acres.
And then the last requirement is that the towns cannot restrict the ownership of an ADU or the principal dwelling. Then the next series that's been covered in the webinars is, well, what's left for local options? What can towns exercise discretion on? Well, the first one's reasonable regulation, specifically related to dimensional, which are the front, rear, side setbacks, bulk, which is normally FAR, and then height. You can apply site plan review. In Chelmsford, the planning board does site plan review. However, in Chelmsford, the zoning board historically is the regulatory entity that deals and specializes in single-family and two-family. And then I think the question at the local level is, if we choose to apply site plan review, is it for detached only? Is it for all ADUs? Is it for a certain size of an ADU? Are there thresholds? Detached seems to be of most interest or sensitivity. And then the third local option is allowing towns to regulate short-term rentals as defined by MGL, which I believe is 31 days or less is a short-term rental.
Okay.
On the sewer regulations, the current regulations do not allow separate laterals and do not allow connections to any detached structure. Pool cabanas, sheds, pool houses, things of that nature. Obviously, detached ADUs aren't allowed, so that's not under consideration. So,
But detached will be allowed by right. So
Correct,
we're going to have to
correct.
amend that anyway.
well, not necessarily. So just to summarize, if the town wants to embrace this opportunity to the maximum extent, you'd have to take into consideration the mathematical limitations on FAR and building coverage for certain lots. You'd have to also take into consideration the accessory building constraints. And you'd have to take into consideration treating ADUs differently under the current SOAR regulations. There's also nothing preventing the town from keeping all of those regulations in place and treating ADUs like any other accessory building.
You mentioned two different laterals. What do you mean by that?
Lateral is the sewer main from the street. So the current DPW sewer regulations do not allow more than one lateral on one lot.
But can you have a sewer line hooked up to the sewer, the main house up on the sewer, and then can the ADU be on septic?
So if the town does not change the sewer regulations,
Yeah,
detached ADUs will have to be on septic.
they have to be, yeah.
Now, if you follow the webinars, and similar with MBTA zoning, the Title V is not within zoning purview. So the zoning's by right, but that doesn't mean that someone can get a Title V permit. it also doesn't mean that they can successfully get through the Board of Health Aquifer Protection regulations.
Can I throw
Thank
a
you.
question out here, if I may? Nobody else got something immediate. One thing I noticed in there was that we cannot limit the ownership of the ADU. Now, is that the ownership of the building?
Either one.
Or is it the ownership of the building and the land underneath it? Because if it's the latter, then we've basically created a very curious way around A&R. And created a situation in which you could take lots that are conforming and by right divide them into lots that are non-conforming. So, now, remember, it's not absolutely necessary that the ownership of the building be the same as the ownership of the land. But it's kind of traditional in New England to do it that way. What is there to say about that?
Yeah, so I just brought up the webinar, and they're highlighting sections,
Okay.
definitions, or provisions. It has to be on the same lot. So
Okay,
by
so-
definition, you're not going to be able to subdivide.
Okay, so you can have an ADU, and the ADU can be owned by somebody else, but the lot still has to be owned by the principal dwelling.
It has to be on the same lot. You could
Well,
condo it.
a lot implies
condo it.
ownership.
You could condo it.
You could,
You could
But you
could
cannot,
condo
but you
it, but
cannot,
the-
you cannot have an ADU on its own lot. It has to be,
Right,
rent
it
out
has to
both,
be,
and you can
exactly.
rent out both.
yeah, you could rent out both, sure.
well,
Here's-
what you say makes sense to me, but the wording that I heard led me to believe that there might be a fuzzy area in here.
Well, to your point, can an ADU be built, a detached ADU be built, and then the land subdivided and sold as a single-family home?
So it wouldn't have frontage. It has to have frontage then.
Well, I mean, in theory, you could have an
theory, you
ADU
could.
that did, but,
If we don't,
If it has frontage
In lot area.
in lot area, you could do it.
So essentially, it is a potential way around.
Well, they could do that now, though.
yeah, they can do that, they can do now.
That's
yeah.
true.
They don't. So this is what the definition talks about. It says, shall not require owner occupancy of either the accessory dwelling unit or the principal
Okay,
structure.
but is there anything in there that speaks specifically to the ownership of the ADU? I thought there was, and maybe I misunderstood what you said initially.
No.
Okay, in that case,
So the
it's
best
not
you
an
could do
issue.
is conduit.
Best you could do is condo, okay.
So current zoning, if we don't change the current zoning regulations at all, is that something that the state would consider unreasonable, where the language is no unreasonable, I forget what the term was.
There isn't a lot of clarity on that. The webinars have indicated that towns don't have to do anything, meaning you don't have to customize ADU zoning, and that by default, your existing zoning would comply. And we've covered examples as to where that would apply. I don't know to what extent, and this, again, the webinars don't have the answers. The guidelines aren't out yet. Presumably, those would provide the answers. But it's not clear to what extent HLC is going to use like an MBTA zoning methodology in determining reasonableness. I don't know to what extent they're going to look at GIS maps, overlays, aquifers, and then look at all of our zoning provisions to determine reasonableness.
So then it would fall to the courts.
no.
If-
Well, my hope, and I think others
ZBA.
hope, is that the guidelines provide some clarity as to what is reasonable.
Right,
So-
which we
But
don't have yet.
There's been no discussion on that within the webinars.
So, right now, this law comes into effect in February, someone wants to add an ADU, what's their process? What would be their process? They go in front of the ZBA?
No.
If we do nothing.
We do
No,
nothing,
they
go-
would, they would be applying directly to the building commissioner, and the building commissioner would basically be going through the same exercise that I went through with you tonight. Do you comply with the 195.8, 195.11? If you do, you're going to get a building permit.
Okay,
If you don't,
then you go to the
then you're going
ZBA,
to the zoning board.
ZBA for a variance.
likely be some sort of special permit. It's not going to be a special permit for the ADU. It's going to be a special permit for relief from
Really
these,
for this,
from these
right,
dimensional.
Right, but
Right.
that's, isn't that the variance process? No, am I misunderstanding?
There may be, in some
Like-
cases, there may be a variance, but it's going to either be a special permit. Once the lot is undersized, it's automatically a special permit.
Okay.
If the lot is conforming to lot area, it's a variance, and where undersized lots are creating a new zoning violation or making an existing zoning violation worse, that also triggers a variance. So for detached, there is no pre-existing violation, because the side yard or rear yard is vacant. So you'd be applying whatever the required setback is.
So if we change the setbacks and FAR to accommodate more ADUs, to make it less restrictive for ADUs, and then they go through the process of subdividing and creating the 2 single-family homes, would that be considered a non-conforming pre-existing condition that would be allowed, even with
You
the,
mean if
That
it
would
was a
trigger an A&R, I
detached?
would think.
I'm not
if it's
following.
detached? So if we relax the ADU requirements,
Relax the setbacks.
relax the setbacks, FAR, the owner builds a detached ADU. They then go through the process of subdividing and essentially creating 2 single-family.
How would they be able to do that?
Well, that's my question. Would they be able to do that because it's essentially a non-conforming,
You have to
pre-existing?
be on the same lot.
No.
No, it would have to be conforming.
No, it's good that there's a couple zoning board members here. My understanding of the current iteration of the zoning board is that they are, unlike past years, they are not inclined or very unlikely to grant variances, particularly for simply subdividing a lot to create a building lot.
Okay.
They no longer do that. The days of friendly variances are essentially over.
We weren't doing that in my day.
It dates back a while ago. But there was a time during, in the last 15 years where it was a different time. And just, simply adding a house in an existing neighborhood wasn't viewed as controversial. I don't know how else to put it. The values of the neighborhoods have changed over time. More importantly, newer members on the zoning board, while they understand the notion of a friendly variance, they increasingly understand the legal thresholds. Council has on numerous times reminded them or increased their awareness that the legal threshold for a variance is to be granted very sparingly. So that message has gotten across. So the notion that undersized lots with an ADU on it would then somehow be allowed to be subdivided, I don't see that as a possibility.
Okay.
One strategy here, I'll just throw this out for conversation, would be to modify our zoning bylaws to remove the restriction on the detached structure itself, which is the biggest chunk of it. Leave all of the rest of the setbacks, FAR, and all of that as it is. And that's why I say it would be very nice to know how many lots actually would be affected by that. That could be done, it could be done fairly easily. It's some small wording changes. We could then, potentially at a later date, consider whether relaxation or modification of the setback and FIR details was warranted. And it might very well be. I mean, I don't want to say that it wouldn't be warranted, but we don't have to do this in one giant swallow.
Yeah, I kind of, so I'm a little shocked because I actually agree with you, Mike. And I know, it's very rare. You should mark this. But I like to also maybe, to your point, maybe open it to public comment. But I'd like to see what comes out of the request. I hate to dump it on the ZBA.
Yeah.
But I'd like to see where we're running into problems, like where people are having
Right.
trouble. And then we can make a more
Right.
precise change, like,
Yeah.
it's kind of like, I like to see where the demand is coming from
Yeah.
and what's preventing certain things to happen. So, like,
Yeah, Evan,
I think I agree with you.
And so I would have made it open to public tonight, except for we had already posted, it wasn't enough time. So I thought this could be just a conversation amongst ourselves, and then at the next meeting, I think hopefully we can get
Well, we could
people
always
coming
invite
back
some
from the
ZBA
ZBA, and
members.
also,
we-
I know
we
there's a
have that
number of
option.
people in town who are interested in, whether or not they could have an ADU, and what would be.
You did, if you recall, this meeting was intended to be invite to ZBA and Housing Advisory
Yeah.
Board. So there are members here. I think that's more than reasonable within the context of what you intended to set this up, as.
Yeah, okay.
well, there's two things going on, right? One is do we want to change the zoning that you referenced, right? But then there's also the existing limited accessory apartment, specifically, and so the question is, what happens to that? Because it has the provision of not being detached.
Yeah,
So does that
so-
immediately annul
Yep,
all
as
of
of,
it?
right, on
So-
February 2nd, that existing LAA bylaw will be basically non-compliant.
So is one of the things we're going to look at is do we want to see what kind of wording changes would be needed for it in order to be compliant, so that
Yeah.
it is still in place?
Yeah, maybe we could have
I would
council
start
help
with
us
that,
with
and
that,
then-
which we probably won't be able
Advance.
to do until we have the guidelines, which,
we
when
know-
are
but
we
we-
expecting them now?
Should be any day, is what we're hearing. It's been a while, we've been hearing that for a while.
We have Glenn and
Got a couple other questions. though.
Brian, yeah, okay.
Evan, you talked initially about the different residential areas that this could be in.
Mhm.
But reading this, I thought it said that it's specifically in single-family residential zoning districts, not residential districts that allow single-family.
Understood.
Oh, I thought it was the latter.
I thought,
The way I presented it to you is the way the webinar has presented it.
But the way it's written, if you look at the legislation slide, 12, I think. Slide 12.
I'm not disagreeing with you. A lot of people on the webinar
That the one. you
agree
just-
with your interpretation. Remember, the webinar was not, this one was put on by the state, and they had several attorneys who are in the municipal world. And that was their interpretation. They weren't asked, and obviously there hasn't been any clarity. My guess and speculation is that HLC has had some initial discussions or work sessions or brainstorming sessions with some of the municipal attorney firms, and that appears to be a likely interpretation. So that's an example where the guidelines would provide clarity. There's also a slide in here that talks about the statute itself now classifies ADUs as a Dover use. So again, it kind of gets lost in all the details, but that was explained that the state believes that this is such a critical and compelling state interest that they've now classified ADUs as a protected
Protected, yeah.
as a protected use. So that, again, that should send clear messages to towns related to reasonable regulation, which leads some to believe that the state guidelines will define reasonable setbacks, reasonable regulation.
Interesting.
although keep in mind that Dover does not, as I understand it, limit precisely the things that we've talked about, the setbacks and such. It deals with other things, but it doesn't touch setbacks, so.
Agreed, but if HLC has if they have the authority to issue regulations, and they know that towns have zoning provisions such as Chelmsford,
Yeah,
particularly FAR,
yeah. Yeah, the FAR might be vulnerable. I'm gonna guess that the other ones wouldn't be, and in any case, it's gonna wind up in Superior Court.
yeah.
That particular issue.
So I think right here, right now, what towns are doing is, they're crafting a generic bylaw. And there's many of them out there, and some towns have recently adopted ADU bylaws. So I think we can take that step, as Joel suggested, maybe start by looking at the existing LAA and try to get a draft, a draft available. Ideally, the regulations come out sooner rather than later, and then we'll be able to customize the bylaw accordingly.
Does the aquifer protection still apply?
Well, the zoning aquifer protection would apply any lot that has 2,500 square feet or 15%, whichever is more impervious, which is in this case is building coverage, would require a special permit. The Board of Health stuff presumably is going to be applicable.
Okay.
I mean, the septic, et cetera?
Certainly for septic, but they also have a regulation that any property within a Zone 2 that's doing any land disturbance, any activity, is subject to a regulation.
So you can put, just looking at the presentation here, on
What
page-
slide?
I'm trying to look what slide this.
Bottom right.
11.
Yep.
You can put a home child care facility in an ADU.
You can,
First line.
yeah, you can put home child daycares are not uncommon.
So you can put businesses
But I don't
in.
think that's the point of that bullet. They're saying that they're protecting ADUs like they have
Yeah,
protecting
Right, so it's,
home childcare, handicapped ramps, so
Yeah,
that
and
those
that's
are.
just the Dover
by-
list.
By right.
Okay.
Yeah,
right.
the intent there is you can't necessarily
Right.
put a home daycare in an ADU. Home daycares are regulated
yeah,
by the
okay.
state for, layout, space per child, things of that nature.
Okay.
I say from my perspective, what I would support is, as other members have talked about, is, removing the provisions of our bylaw that are in conflict, like the owner occupancy, the detached unit
Yeah.
provision. I would not be in favor of wholesale changes, treating them differently until we see the state guidelines. Because I see my role as a planning board member is, it's always a balancing act. We're trying to provide, we're trying to balance the rights of property owners that want to add an ADU, but we're also trying to balance the rights of the abutters to those property owners to make sure that they're not creating a situation where they can be so close or so imposing on their neighbors. I think that's my concern.
Yep,
Yeah, I would agree with
Agreed,
that.
dead on.
It's well stated.
yeah.
I also think aligning our terminology with the state would be useful,
Good point.
with the definition and the terminology of the use.
Yeah, like kind of when we did the stormwater changes, we took the state law and.
Yeah.
Okay, I do feel badly that you guys came and then we bait and switched because,
Let him talk.
yeah, so do you guys want to,
To clarify, these are town officials, and so we're getting input from town officials, not from the
Right.
public.
We invited them
we
specifically.
invited them
Invited to that,
as
okay.
part of our work session to give us their expert input as ZBA officials. I'm not sure if there's, Virginia also, if you have anything you want to add, but Brian and Glenn. So these guys are both on the ZBA. Brian's the chair for the public.
Want to go up to the podium?
Glenn Diggs, I'm a member of the ZBA. Many of the topics that you've talked about tonight, we've talked about many times in the ZBA because historically it's all fallen to our committee. And we have given special permits and variances, one not. One of the questions that comes up is how many is this really talking about? There are very few ADAs in town. I talked to 3 real estate agencies today earlier and asked them, how often do they see one come up for sale? And 2 of them said virtually never, and one said maybe 1 a year, if that. So I asked the assessor to find out how many ADUs are in town, and I'm still waiting for an answer. So we don't know how much that's going to impact. As far as the state rules, they are almost the same that Westford has right now. The only difference is Westford did not like the idea of the 25%. And the reason is, if you moved into town, let's say in the 60s, you bought a ranch that represented maybe 42 by 24 was a standard size, or a cape 24 by 32, or a split. And if you take 25% of that, you end up with a number like 300. But what if you bought if you had a house that was built in like the last 7 or 8 years, that's 3,000 square feet? You could have an ADU that's bigger than the houses that were built in town in the 70s and 60s, which didn't make a lot of sense. So that would pit one type of resident versus another type of resident, and so they decided that they would just live with 900 square feet max. Right now, Chelmsford is 850 square foot max, rather than pitting one type of customer versus another type of customer. The bylaws, or no, it's not a bylaw, but the report that came out from the sewer department created a special problem because there are 2 parts in it that are in conflict. And they're looking at that, and they're hoping to have some resolution during the winter. They still have plenty of time to look at it. But there is one part that says that ADUs, detached ADUs cannot be attached to the current line, but we don't have any detached in town. So there's another part of what they talk about is that the town could waive, meaning the ZBA, could waive that requirement and say that it can be attached. So they are looking at this conundrum, and they don't know which way they're going to go, but they are looking at it, they know it exists. The issue in general about the ADUs laws in town, I was asked by our committee, the ZBA committee, to reach out to other committees in town to see if they would be interested in supporting the creation of a separate committee, new committee, comprised of members of the planning board, the housing advisory board, various interested parties, and the general public to discuss the topic, because it didn't seem that the ADA rules in town were matched to where the world should be now. And so I started that, but we knew that there was going to be some state provision coming down, we just didn't know when. So when this came down, we decided to suspend that investigation, because this is the rules, and it came down to this. And it seemed that the question comes out to reasonableness. Now, what can you change? It talks specifically about the setbacks and so forth that a town has established. Now, what the courts will decide, sooner or later, one of the towns is going to object to this whole thing. It's going to go to court like Milton went to court over the MBTA. Where that goes, nobody knows. But it's bound to happen with as many cities and towns that we have. So you can either join in or not join in. The question is, the biggest fear is, how many of these 2-family lots are we going to create? If you're going to build an ADU in today's world, you're probably talking about $300 per square foot or more. I tried to find that out from a builder today, but I couldn't get an answer. But let's say it's $300 per square foot. So if you build an ADU, 900 square feet, that's 270,000. You're probably going to pay another 100,000 and this and that. So you got to come up with $400,000 to begin with to build an ADU. And the question is, if you're going to build an ADU and you're going to spend $400,000, the biggest drawback to that is you put mom and dad in it, sooner or later, mom and dad are not going to be here. What do you do with it? So in Chelmsford, you can either let it sit there, do nothing, tear it down, or make some other use for it. But you're basically throwing $400,000 down the drain. The biggest change in the law to impact the creation of a lot of these units is that no longer do you spend $400,000 and throw it down the drain. Now we can rent it out to anybody, and we don't have to live in the main house. You could live in the little house if you wanted and let someone else live in the big house. They opened that up. So when you took those rules out, when I talked to the realtors, they said that they looked at an ADU in terms of reselling a house like it was a pool. If you found someone who wants a pool, it's an increase in price. If you found someone who doesn't want a pool, it's a negative on the sale. Well, they said, right now they look at ADUs the same way. If you have a property, it's going up for sale, and you have an ADU, if you have someone in the family who's going to live in it, it's a plus. But if you take the restriction out, which this law does, that a family member has to live there, you're taking the biggest restriction to creation of these units that there is, because now you can make money. And right now in Westwood, that's the rule. You can rent it out to anybody after they die or whatever the case may be. So there's a lot of guidelines to come, fine points, and the guidelines seem to be aimed at reasonableness, because reasonableness is what you believe and what you believe. There is no common ground in terms of reasonableness. So hopefully the guidelines will help to clarify that. But, the question is, if you change the dimensional requirements of FAR for ADUs, will they look on it as you're trying to get around the rules? Maybe yes, maybe no. But if you make the dimensional requirements less, you're encouraging more units being built. You would be discouraging it if you made it bigger, because you could fit less units would be able to qualify. So there are many questions out there, and really trying to do anything without any kind of guidelines is a little waste of time, other than talking about the periphery stuff. And again, changing the language to more closely resemble, what the state is talking about. But as far as specifics, that's up in the air, and how things develop in terms of Chelmsford's particular situation with the sewerage. That's for the building department and sewer department to come up with, and they're working on it. There's also a question that if you have a smaller home, and let's say you come up with, you're allowed, based on the size of the main unit, you're allowed an ADU of 345 square feet. There are also restrictions out there in terms of boards of health, of how many square feet you need to support a person. 345 feet is not going to support two people. They can't live in 345 square feet. And we, in the ZBA, we see that a lot of the times in terms of what people come in and ask for. That, if you say, well, they don't need 2 bedrooms, they need 1 bedroom. If you're a senior citizen, in many cases, you have to have 2 bedrooms. One person snores. One person has incontinence. One person has this, debilitating back pain, whatever the case may be, and they have to sleep in different rooms. So you need 2 bedrooms. So there's many, nuances of this. It's not a simple answer. And in the ZBA, when we started to talk about this, we would say, well, let's give 15 minutes of discussion. 45 minutes later, we're still talking about it because it's like a tree. You get up to one branch, and it branches off, now you got 2 more, and then you got 3 more, and then you got 5 more as you get to talk about it. So it's not an easy topic to just say we're done with it. So I would encourage you to just wait for the guidelines. It will take a lot of the innuendo off the table. So, any questions you might have, I'll be happy to answer them.
One question I have, but in your experience, what do you anticipate with regards to like driveways? If you have a separate unit, do you anticipate that people want to put in a second driveway for that unit?
The law says they have to have a separate second space. Is that
Yeah.
correct, Evan?
You cannot require more than one.
One. All they need is one space.
Right.
So, one space is 20 by 10?
About,
That's all you need, and it could be off of the existing driveway going into the home. And the units they can be created in all kinds of ways. You can just take an existing garage, 2-car garage. How many homes in Chelmsford are ranches with 2-car garage or a small cape with 2-car garage? And you can convert the garage without, the way it's written, without any oversight, they can just convert that into an ADA. So you can have it detached, you can have it attached, whatever the case may be. It's really kind of in its infancy, and no one has thought about all the inferences of where things will end up. It's kind of virgin territory. You go into Mars, you don't know what you're going to find there.
I have the information on the undersized lots. It's an email from Nan Arroway to the planning board at the time, back in February of 2023, based upon the assessor's data. RB zoning district has 8,028 single-family parcels. 3,500 are over 40,000 square feet. 3,037 have a land area between 20K and 40K. 1,572 have a land area between 10 and 20K.
How many?
1,572. 385 are under 10K. And then in the RC zoning district, there's 572 single families. Again, even though RC allows 2-family by right, we're not talking about the 2 families for ADU purposes. There's 572 single families in the RC zoning district. 34 have over 40,000 square feet. 227 between 20K and 40K. 247 between 10K and 20K, and 188 under 10K.
Can you send us that,
Yep.
please?
So, but those numbers assume we're talking about a single-family home.
That's correct.
Does this law restrict it to a single-family dwelling?
Yes.
So
So you couldn't build a
RC,
duplex?
If you have a 2-family on a lot, you cannot build an ADU. Let me bring that up, because I know it's in here.
I'd rather have
Now, when you
ADUs.
say that, we have some particular situations in which there are by right division of a single family to multi. Houses that are older than a certain age, I believe, isn't there a by right to divide the dwelling itself into 2? If you take a single family dwelling that's then had an additional living unit put into it, does that, for the purposes of this, become a 2-family?
No.
So that would not be considered a 2-family,
No.
but,
Currently, an LAA within a single family is assessing purpose is still a single family with an
Okay.
asterisk. of having an LAA.
So then they could have an ADU?
Yeah, sounds like it. So some of the bigger, older houses in town would be perfect,
But I haven't seen anything in the regulations that restrict it to single-family dwellings. I've seen only that reference to single-family residential zoning district.
Yeah, I'm looking for that.
Which is why I have a concern about the interpretation of that wording, because if it doesn't restrict it to a single-family dwelling, and it allows in any zoning that allows single-family dwellings, that's a very big difference in volume in Chelmsford.
But we're gonna have to get clarity on that. I'm just looking through here, I don't see it readily clarified.
Well, I'd say first we wait for the guidelines to see if they provide clarity on that.
Yep.
Because sounds like it's come up in the prior,
Let me go to the definitions.
Stakeholders'
I think
conversations.
it's probably clarified in the statutory definition of an ADU.
Slide 7.
Has the definition?
Yep. And I didn't see it in there either.
I think I can clarify this a little. I think what Mike is referring to, this is Brian Reedy, the Zoning Board of Appeals. Anything constructed prior to 1938, the advent of zoning in town, is by right a two-family dwelling if the choice is made. You need 600 feet per unit. You need the setbacks, the standard setbacks, and there's a couple other, I didn't have time to reference it, but that is what I think Mike is referring to, which is not an ADU, it's a legal two-family, it's been created, you go to the Board of Appeals, it's not a special permit, but it's by right, and it's granted, and you still have to follow the building code, but it's, I don't think there's a large number of homes that were here in 1934, but any that was would qualify for that. And it's an
But then if
attached,
they
it
were-
has to be attached, so you couldn't build it in a barn or anything like that.
but then if they were a two-family, then by the definition, they couldn't have an ADU.
They would not be entitled to the ADU, in my opinion. I think that's correct, because they become a
It
two-family.
seems reasonable.
I think that's
When you
the
apply.
interpretation, but it's worth getting clarity on it. I mean, even the Copeland and Page advisory that came out, as of right in single-family residential zoning districts, and the ADU is an accessory use to a principal residential structure is what it's referred to, so.
Yeah, but that
I hear what you're saying.
completely depends on the interpretation of that single-family residential
yeah, it
district.
does.
Well, we have 4 residential districts. Residential multifamily, which doesn't matter, you can put more units on a multi. You have RC, which is the two-family allowance, and there's pockets of them in town. They are already allowed to be two families. They are not already two families, but regardless of this law, if you came in and said, I want to make this a two-family, you would be entitled to. Setbacks would apply, and now sewer would be a factor, but so we have RB and RA. Those are all larger lots and entirely, whatever number, he said that those combined up to, almost every one of those would be allowed.
Yeah,
If
but
if
Mike-
you want to cut your house in half, or use the garage, as Glenn said, and make that an ADU, you can. You don't have a new lateral, you don't have any restrictions, you're not changing the FAR, you're not changing anything, you're not changing the lot coverage.
Yeah, but my concern is that if we eventually relax ADU,
Oh, I'm not suggesting you do.
Oh, no, I know.
I'm
but I'm
not
saying if that's the
suggesting at all that
direction
you do.
we
I'm
end
just
up
telling you
going,
the reality
that we
of this.
relax the ADU, FAR, and setbacks, and the interpretation is such that an ADU could be added to a two-family.
I don't
that-
think that would be a possibility the way I understand it, but there is a lot to come out.
Well, that's what I'm hoping that is the case, but if the interpretation is that an ADU could be added to a two-family,
You could have a
they
three-family.
could
I don't think that's
essentially
the
have
case.
a
Yeah, I mean, none of the
three-family.
webinars, I don't recall any of the webinars getting hung up on that. There was a lots of questions
We
from.
can seek the clarity on
Yep,
it, but
yep, absolutely.
Definitely. And the other thing that I have a personal concern about is that if you own a house and you want to buy it, and there's a garage on it to make it this easy, and you decide to make that an apartment, you don't even have to live there. You can show up and rent out the house and rent out the garage. And it's going to be more valuable than not renting out the garage. So there's, my concern is going to be a lot more than are anticipated, because it's going to be easy to do, and it's going to become a business. Buy the house.
Yeah,
And
I
that's-
agree with
And that's
that.
why,
And
I mean,
increase your
I hate to say
rents.
this, but there's a lot of big private equity firms that have pushed this.
Yeah,
And I think this is
I think
gonna
it's
do
going
the
to become a
exact
business, honestly.
opposite of what it's trying to do, because I think what ends up happening is these private equity firms, real estate firms, will outbid the young, nice couple.
People
who
trying to buy
wants
homes and they'll be stuck in the rental.
Right,
Yeah.
and they're stuck in the rent. That's my biggest fear, and that was my fear when I spoke to our state reps about this, because that, there's a reason why it's not owner occupied. And I'm afraid they're gonna start, they can, because they have the money.
We've
They've
granted
pockets
these
and
for a
they can
long
outbid.
time, and we're very
Yeah.
diligent about the relationship, it's a family member, that it's attached, and we don't vary much. To clarify, what you are allowed to have is 750 feet now. So it could be 150 feet bigger than it is now and just be a rental property.
As Glenn mentioned before, building one of these is going to be expensive to begin with. And if you have a family that's looking to do this, it's going to be difficult to recoup the costs of $400,000 of building it. However, an investment company easily has that capital to put down and make it an investment property. So I agree with the initial steps of doing the minimum we need to do to get this
Yeah.
in compliance and aligned with the state. But I think then we really need to take a hard look at how much we really want to go beyond that.
There's definitely a lot to talk about with this.
And I think, and it's not necessarily under our purview, but I think it's definitely the sewer is an issue because the Board of Health, at least when I've been there, consistently has expressed a very great concern about a lot of the turning to
Capacity
septic
issues.
that's going on. And so I think that's something that we, regardless of what we do, I think that needs to be addressed, is how we're going to handle the sewer septic question.
And I think that if it's an existing house and you're not going to increase the size, that's not a tool anymore either. It's basically by right. It already exists. Per bedroom, is it 500 gallons a day? And there's a fee for it, and then you can do it. You want to add a bedroom, is that correct?
Yeah.
A bedroom's 110 under Title V. The SOAR regs cap an increase not to exceed 500 gallons per day.
I thought they were also using that as a calculation of what to expect if you did add the bedroom
I think a four-bedroom house is, what, 440, 450?
a day.
Yeah.
So if you have a 3 now and you make it a 4 or a 5, you can increase by 110 gallons, something like that.
Well, 110 if you make it a 4, and
An existing single-family would be, whether it's an ADU or additional bedrooms, I mean, you can increase up to 500 gallons per day,
Right.
and each bedroom is 110.
And you're not going to be denied from the sewer to do that the way it's set up. It's
Correct. The only constraint on the current SOAR regs is it does not contemplate detached for any connection to the system.
Right. But if it's not detached, though,
Sure.
Park your car outside. The garage is already built. It really is. It's going to be a concern. I think it's going to be a lot more than people were anticipating. Glenn has showed me Bedford already has it, and they're not seeing a lot of them built. They're not seeing it done. So maybe I'm just crying wolf. But I think that people are going to go in this and try to do it as a business. And
Yeah, I agree with you. I think the larger, like the better off towns like Lincoln, Lexington, where there's a high need for nanny apartments, that may be a different dynamic. And obviously, those towns are a lot more expensive. But I think more of like our demographic in our towns, I definitely have heard that private equity has been behind this ADU push, the way it's been written.
yeah.
At the State House. They're the ones that have been pushing it, not individuals who want their parents to live.
But, at the end of the day, I think everyone wants the same goal, is to keep the town
Yep.
sort of where it is. It's gonna have growth, grow or die, but this could really change a lot. I mean, 500 of them is gonna put another school on the map, so it'd be tough.
Yeah, even like, and I even know, speaking to people from Lowell, where their lot sizes are even smaller, like, they had concerns about this.
Oh, I think
Like-
very valid. I know, it's statewide. We're just
Yeah.
looking at a little micro here to see how it's gonna affect us. Well, thank you for your work on this,
No,
and
thank
we'll
you for your-
see what we can figure out.
So, sounds like we have a consensus to align the language so that our current ADU policy is not illegal.
Yeah, I would say minimal change to comply with the state regulations. We're
Definitions.
gonna have to do that anyway.
Okay,
And
and
then we can work with that as our base.
then once the guidelines come down,
Yeah, we can
I think
tweak
we
it.
should have another meeting that has public input. And then my question is, past that, should we have a subcommittee of people who works on it, or do we want the board to do it as board business?
If the board's inclination is minimal changes in order to comply, let's review the draft regulations, see how close our existing regulations are to being compliant. If we don't have to make any changes, I don't think you really need a study committee at that point. Because based upon the planning board setting the, setting the direction. At that point, there won't be really much to discuss, assuming that our current regulations are deemed reasonable.
But we would have to, like, if we wanted to change that zoning bylaw, we'd have to bring it to Springtown meeting, correct?
Yeah, and we're gonna have to
Yeah,
have the
we'll have to,
hearing and
we'll
all
have to
go
either
with it.
delete the existing LAA
Yep.
in its entirety and adopt a new ADU,
Yep.
or revise the LAA accordingly.
Yeah, and will you give it to council to?
Oh, yeah, absolutely. Yeah, we do that routinely.
Okay, yeah, I mean, I think that would be like just
Place
at
to
a minimum,
start.
just to start, right? Like, this is what we're doing.
Yeah.
I don't think we're gonna have any feedback or guidance or anything for Springtown meeting, but we might as well clean up what we can.
Yeah.
And I've
Well, and I
mentioned-
mean, if the
This is gonna
guidelines
be a
come down
two-step
next
process,
week,
minimum.
then maybe we could, but
Well, I've mentioned to the board previously that the manager has indicated that a special town meeting prior to February 2nd is amenable. And if we, as a town, choose not to take town meeting action prior to February 2nd, there could be a special between then and the April.
Yeah, but again, like, if I'm not mistaken, I think you said, like, it would, it just
we
becomes.
still have to adopt the zoning changes by
Right,
town.
but even if it goes into law on February, that just makes that zoning bylaw irrelevant.
It also,
Does it cause a
it
conflict?
also initiates the state law. So people will be able to file for a building permit.
Right,
And if the building commissioner deems it compliant, a building permit will be issued.
right.
Do we know what the timeline would be to get such changes before a special town meeting? Prior to February?
What I can tell you is that the date of adoption isn't really the critical date. It's the date of the first zoning legal advertisement.
Okay,
I mean, and I'll confirm that with council.
okay, I think that's right.
But
that's
and then it gets backdated to that date.
Right, right.
But in order to submit a legal advertisement for a public hearing, we need the draft, the final draft.
Right.
So,
So
I
is
agree with
that-
Glenn. I mean, there's not much more we can do until we get those state guidelines.
Is that something you want to take a first shot at, or do you want one of us to, or?
What part?
I assume you're the
Redraft.
drafter, assume you're talking about the revision of the LAA or anything else that needs?
I mean, what I'm hearing is let's not spend much more time on this until the regulations come out. That's what I'm hearing.
Okay.
No, I think we could
Okay.
reasonably make the minimal changes. There's a difference between our bylaw does not comply and our bylaw is not considered reasonable.
All right, so
It's a different process.
All right, so I'm more than happy to spend
Let's
the
reach-
time,
let's
it won't
reach
take long to look
compliance.
at the existing LAA, make the track changes in an attempt to get it into compliance with what we currently know.
That would be
Yeah.
great. Could we have that by the next,
Yeah, yep.
I don't think it's a huge change,
Doesn't sound like it.
No, that.
but it's a
for that
careful
one
change.
wouldn't be.
It's a careful change.
Just wanted to add.
Still to be enforced would have to be brought to town meeting.
Oh, yeah.
Yes,
And
yes.
we'd want to do that ideally before February 2nd if we could. So could we also get the timeline, the backed out timeline?
Yep, yeah, while Glenn's
Sorry.
talking, I'll look at it.
I mean, legally, he was saying that we don't have to have it passed by town before February. We just have to start the process to have it approved by the town.
Yeah, but it's,
before
it's
February.
effective on the,
Yeah,
publication.
yeah.
Just want to add a couple of things. This is a small book, but it's advertised on Amazon as a book. It's by the U.S. Department of Housing and Urban Development, and they have case studies of where ADUs were very successful. One of the towns that they use in this saying is very successful is Lexington, Massachusetts, which is surprising. But there are others, and there are companies right now who already specialize in building nothing but ADUs. And they take the homeowner through the entire process. They help them find the financing. They work with the town to come up with a septic plan. They build their units to complete standards of today in terms of construction standards. They don't put any gas in. They only build them with electric and heat pumps and so forth. So they're very efficient. And they're out there marketing very heavily on a one-stop shop to build an ADU, that they do everything that the homeowner wants. All the homeowner has to do is provide the money, and that's it. And there will be more of these companies as time goes on.
Like solar.
Okay. Got it.
So, just looking at the schedule here, you meet January 8th and the 22nd. Presumably, if we review the marked up LAA bylaw on December 11th, and maybe we have the state guidelines between now and then, we could advertise a public hearing. We would literally advertise it in December to open in January. So from a planning board perspective, there's enough time. I don't know what the lead time is to actually call a special. I think it's 20 days, but I'm not positive on that. 14.
Yeah.
So I think the month of January provides adequate time. It's minimum, but it provides adequate time.
But I wouldn't, even if the guidelines do come out, I wouldn't want to rush additional work into this
Yeah.
process. I would want to stay with the basic
Yep.
for that initial draft and then form a
Phase
committee.
two.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, so what you're saying, if the state regulations are released and it defines reasonable regulation that our existing bylaw is not consistent with, then we need to do a more involved process.
After the initial passage of,
Yeah.
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 Okay.
Okay, good.
Okay,
So on.
so next up, we have the BAOD zoning review. Evan,
I didn't have anything prepared for
yeah,
this.
no, I was just gonna say that you presented us with multiple presentations that have been done over the years.
Yeah, I mean, my refresher messages would be that while a lot has changed since the adoption of the BEAOD during COVID and post-COVID, and market conditions have certainly changed, sewer limitations are a reality in Chelmsford related to business development, and you have the new Board of Health regulations. The initial strategy, in my mind, remains the same, where between the BAOD overlay tied to the COID, the intent was to provide maximum flexibility from a dimensional regulatory perspective, and the BAOD introduced business amenities and multifamily. The concern that was expressed at the last meeting where the board discussed this about the underlying zoning not being consistent with the vision of 129 overlay. I don't disagree with that, but the strategy at the time, and I think the understanding was that because the Chelmsford place in the regional marketplace was not, we weren't necessarily in a driver's position. We were more of a secondary market, that the town didn't want to do anything where opportunities were lost. I think the strategy was, we want to be open to any and all reasonable proposals, and we want to be able to have that conversation, meaning the planning board and the town wanted to be able to engage and hear proposals. If proposals had to be denied, so be it. As opposed to taking a position of trying to customize the zoning bylaw with particular uses in hopes that the market brought those uses that were desired. So it's a slightly different philosophical strategy, but in my opinion, because the market still doesn't appear to view Chelmsford as a primary market and more of a secondary market, going into the zoning bylaw and beginning to eliminate or severely restrict uses such as warehousing, indoor contractor condos, things of that nature, may not, it may eliminate opportunities. It may eliminate the only opportunity that the market sees available, particularly where multifamily doesn't appear to be a politically viable, never mind infrastructure-wise, not viable. I think the last comment I'll make is, I think the strategy with the COID in 129, it was never tied to a time frame. It was always about trying to accommodate the market in the now, and not attempt to project what a future market may or may not be. That's why the use table is so broad, and the definitions associated with the uses are so broad. Historically, it served the town well in the sense that myself or the building commissioner never had to say to an applicant, your use is not permitted, which speaks to the town's interest in at least allowing somebody to present to the planning board, which in my opinion is where you want that conversation to take place. Certainly if there are uses or scales of uses that are non-starters, such as the warehouse one, then as I stated, I encourage the board to clearly articulate that, and that's a good example. The market clearly sees that, and then they go somewhere else. But my concern is, we know we're not a primary market. We're not quite sure what our secondary market is. COVID and post-COVID have continued to change that. 129 has unique challenges related to property values, high depreciation, diverse ownership groups. All of those ingredients put together would lead me to recommend that flexibility and maximum opportunity is best served, while understanding that the planning board has discretionary special permits. Anything over 20,000 square feet is a special permit.
Yep.
So the town is not, while the zoning bylaw can create proposals that aren't necessarily desired or proactively thought of, the zoning bylaw provides more than adequate protection via the special permits for the board to manage that.
I have a few questions. Reading through those, I was interested in, and I don't think I've seen it lately. I know that there was annual presentations to the select board about where do we stand now, but what are the updated numbers? Like, what, what are the most updated how are the trends been since like
Yeah.
2019, I think was the last one?
Yeah, so what you're referring to is former Business Development Director Lisa Maroney. I say former because she is, within the last 6 months, she is now the HR Director. So as you indicated, she would provide quarterly updates to the Select Board. She would highlight major themes within 129, such as vacancy rates, new businesses. I think the summary of her tenure was that vacancy square footage was reduced by 1 million square feet. It went from 1.5 million down to about 500,000.
Which is what percent?
That's about 5%,
Okay.
which is considered a healthy market vacancy rate.
That's excellent.
When it was 1 million square feet, there were a lot of smaller office buildings that had vacancies. The 500,000 square feet that remains existed 2, 3, 4 years ago. Those were a 330 Billerica Road, which now has Depressed and Triton. So that one came off the list. The next one up is 300 Billerica. That's the one that's was recently in front of you for an applicability. The next one up is 275 Billerica. 270 Billerica. And then you had the two properties on River Neck. So right there is your 500,000 to 600,000 square feet. When you look at the reports, particularly the Mass Development Crossroads report, it talked about those as being like white elephants, functionally obsolete. They didn't have any value because a developer or an owner would have to go in and demise buildings that were created for single tenants, and you'd have to go in and literally demise it into smaller spaces, and that's very, very expensive. So property owners didn't do it proactively. And then the other thing that was a takeaway with Lisa's reports and outreach is that when these overlays were adopted and when that market study was done, pre-COVID, there was some indication that biotech and life sciences, particularly small labs, would reach Chelmsford. They were rapidly going up Route 3, and Chelmsford was next in line. It never happened. And you can blame that on COVID, you can blame it on a variety of things. But the next in line seems to be a similar theme with 129, related to a variety of market trends that never really made it up to Chelmsford. And so that's why I say it's not necessarily a primary market, it's more of a secondary market. The problem with referring to a secondary market is we've never been able to figure out exactly what that means. At one time, when DCU came to town, it was referred to as businesses that would look at Chelmsford 129 as secondary functions, not primary functions.
Like their back office
Yeah.
or something?
And that's fine.
Yeah.
And so then maybe that still is our sweet spot. I think what we're finding more recently is the sweet spot for 129 is small to medium-sized companies, 20,000, 40,000 square feet. And with the exception of all those white elephants, all those other buildings have that kind of tenant space, which is why historically, all of the buildings that are off the main Billerica Road have not been problematic because they're smaller tenant spaces.
I see.
So the strategy and the challenge for the town is, how previously, what do you do with those white elephants? As time has moved on, and I mentioned this to you at your last meeting, 270 Billerica Road is the first example where an investor was able to financially make it viable to actually demolish an office building and build something other than an office building. And I mentioned that, last in line, that trend has been happening for over a decade. Started in Burlington, went to Woburn, went to Bedford, went to Billerica. So that's the lag that I think 129 experiences.
What about the buildings across the street? Have any of them been demolished and rebuilt?
No,
None of them.
no.
What about the 500 square feet that remains? What is that, large or small?
It's primarily the larger buildings that I've mentioned. So, 300 Billerica is still listed, even though it's, it's transitioning. 270 is still in a database. Riverneck Road is still in a database. So the 500 I wouldn't classify it as like we would a couple years ago, where it was just completely vacant office without any plan. I think, as we now know, all of those buildings, the property owners have attempted or have successfully
Spoken for.
come up with a Plan B or a Plan A, and they're transitioning away from that traditional office asset.
The report envisioned a lot of things that I feel like didn't come to fruition, and it may be that they were tried and there wasn't finance or support or whatever, probably because of COVID, but, things like having regular meetings with the owners and it seems like that's one of the big problems, is there's so many owners, and they all have their own agendas or timelines or financing available or whatever it is.
Yep.
And so to try and, get them all on the same page is like herding cats. But also like the trails and making a community sense, having the food truck parks, like
Yes.
none
So-
of that has happened.
So it wasn't due to lack of effort. If you recall, or you look back at EDC minutes, select board updates, when Lisa was hired, she aggressively networked, organized. And if you really look back, one of the first things that the EDC did with Lisa was create a video. And at that time, there were property owners giving testimonials that there was a buzz. That's what they used. And there was. When we would go to regional events along the Route 3 corridor, there was a lot of buzz about Chelmsford, the overlay. Remember, the BOD overlay was being adopted because we had press lined up. So that was quite an achievement. And that served as a catalyst, because all the other property owners and investors and commercial brokers wanted to know about it. And so when we held meetings, they were well attended. 50, 60, 70 stakeholders would attend. Business people, property owners, realtors, investors, things of that nature. And while some of them expressed an interest in collaborating for the better good, they all immediately acknowledged that either they're small locally owned properties, or regionally based property owners, or they're large REITs. And so, as you mentioned, the diversification of the property owner models, the motivations, the interest didn't clearly provide a common interest. The other theme that came up was, well, we'd like to see what the town's plans and actions are. And if you drive down there, you'll see some wayfinding signage. That was one of the primary town actions. But beyond that, the town has not, we did some sidewalk improvements, but the town has not, and I'm not suggesting that it was warranted or not warranted. We haven't done any kind of capital investment related to trying to create trails or widen the road or, make.
Connect to Bruce Freeman or
Yeah, none of those.
outdoor venues.
None of those are easy, but we also know from speaking to the businesses and property owners, none of that really matters, meaning none of them came to us and said, if you make it look like a certain way, if you provide blue bikes, rental bikes, and you provide a food truck area, or you create the activity, none of them stated definitively that would make or break any decision that they made. So again, it's not like comparing companies that are looking to locate in Burlington where the placemaking was important. And again, I think that speaks to what kinds of businesses are looking to locate in Chelmsford and what their labor pool is. Many of the businesses down there are tried and true software engineering. So the the type of employee is, as I understand it, is middle-aged, not young professionals. So again, it's not the same. The businesses aren't necessarily looking for the same environment that they would expect or need or want in Burlington or a Waltham. I think they understand that, their labor pool is driving in. It's a convenience of driving in, parking in large parking lots, and that they're not necessarily looking for that mixed environment. That's not to dismiss the notion of Prest and adding in some baseline amenities. So that was the strategy of the overlay district. It acknowledged that the minimum goal was to get baseline amenities in there. I'll provide the opportunity, which it does. It then also had this aspirational vision, assuming that the marketplace fully embraced it. We were never sure if the marketplace would fully embrace it. All we knew at the time was that Prest was ready to go. 3-4 years later, at least to my surprise, with the success of Prest, we have not received another inquiry of an upscale fast casual restaurant moving in there, not from a property owner, not from an investor. That may speak to the notion, as I mentioned to you at your last meeting, RMR, who owns the building that Prest is in, it took them 2 years of internal strategy conversations to convince themselves that converting a small portion of an office building was in their best interest. So that it speaks to the
Rigidity.
yeah, these particularly the REITs they're in a certain business and they're in a large portfolio and they are risk adverse. That may explain, why you're not seeing with 300. They didn't come to the table saying, I love the Prest idea. I got another one lined up. When they heard your feedback, I think that sent them back to the drawing board saying, let's see if we can make a go of this. But the point of the overlay again is to provide the market opportunity in the maximum flexible manner that we can do from a zoning perspective, and then allow the planning board process to decide whether that's the right project for that location. I think the piece that the planning board struggles with and the community struggles with is this aspirational vision. And sitting here today, I can't tell you how aspirational it is. The market study is dated, it's pre-COVID.
Right.
So that's why I suggested, if the board is interested in revisiting the use tables, I would strongly recommend we bring in, market experts, either people who own property down there or who market or broker the properties down there, regional brokers or real estate professionals, so that you can hear from them what they believe, how the market views Chelmsford.
Well, what about the aspect of the Class B and Class A office space?
Yeah.
Like, what is involved,
So
like, ours is all Class B,
Yeah,
and
so
that's not good. Or 80%.
So
Like,
that,
what makes,
so I
how
don't want to
much-
say that's a deficiency, because that could be the sweet spot for Chelmsford's role in the marketplace, assuming office is still a component of that. Meaning not every business wants Class A, wants to pay for Class A office space, such as Burlington, Waltham, Woburn. So that's a secondary market, which is fine. Serves a market purpose. But because office is essentially dead, Chelmsford has seen a lot of small medical healthcare businesses
Device.
move in. Tremendous amount of medical care in 129 now. And these are small dentist offices, small surgical centers, very specialized. That's a tremendous sweet spot. And it picks up on Doctors Park and Center. So that's clearly a market strength, great location. The concern, I think, with Class B and Cs is not necessarily the focus at its office. In my opinion, it speaks to depreciation and lack of investment, which was one of the initial themes that I presented when we were trying to adopt the original COID. Is we can't force anyone to do proactive investments. In Burlington, Woburn, Waltham, property owners would proactively reposition their assets. They would physically go in and build out new lobbies, amenities, demise floors, because they knew there was a market, and they would proactively make that investment. That does not occur in Chelmsford. Never has, and likely never will. What in Chelmsford, they prefer to have a signed tenant, and then they negotiate, the tenant improvements. So the overlays, again, were designed to send a message to the marketplace, the property owners, of we don't want zoning in and of itself to be the deal breaker. And in many communities, the zoning process was the highest risk. In Chelmsford, we said, well, we already understand that, you have high depreciation, secondary market, there's unique challenges. Strategically, we don't want zoning in and of itself to be the reason why you say no. So that's why there was a buzz, because our zoning, we could literally say to stakeholders, unlike our competitors up and down the Route 3 corridor, zoning even in and of itself doesn't say no. The uses are allowed, the flexibility under dimensional requirements is there. There's a will of the planning board in the town to hear proposals so that we can work with you in an attempt to get a good project approved. That was the spirit and intent, and where the planning board has been given the opportunity, it has worked. The problem is that it hasn't generated a lot of proposals. And obviously, more recently, the proposals that we have been getting weren't really even contemplated a decade ago. No one envisioned or projected COVID and the fallout of COVID and building warehouses. It truly, what you read is what the vision was. And at the time, the market study indicated that Chelmsford was next in line to reap those benefits.
So maybe the discussion shouldn't be is the overlay doing its job. Maybe it's how should we rethink what the purpose of the overlay was and reset expectations. Because I think hearing you describe it about removing the obstacles and allowing things to happen and the flexibility is very different from how it was sold at town meeting and a lot of the presentation information. A lot of the presentation information is more about drawing people in and
If you build it, they'll
being
come.
proactive and having it be very actively pursued.
The 129 overlay.
Yeah.
Yeah, so the flexibility is grounded in the COID.
Yeah.
Because the COID was adopted, we were then able to take the next step on the amenities. The amenities was live, work, play. At the time, that was the buzz. Third Ave in Burlington, companies were trying to attract, high-value talent. That young professional demanded a certain type of live, work, play environment. So that was the spirit and intent of 129.
But even that is allowing these things to happen. It's not incentivizing or being proactive about
It incentivized it because the amenities were allowed by right, the retail amenities were allowed by right, and then you tie it to COID, which provides tremendous flexibility that traditional zoning doesn't allow. Trust me, the COID flexibility I'll give you an example. Let's assume someone came to the board and proposed a mini Third Ave, a very, very mini Third Ave. Maybe it was a couple buildings going up Omni Way. And the board loved the concept. But using regular zoning wouldn't have created a walkable environment. The
No.
COID would allow that.
Yeah, I get that. But my point is that these overlays, the BAOD and the COID, are allowing that to happen. It's not really incentivizing it. It's not being proactive about it because we're not
I hear what
seeing
you're saying.
it.
So the only free tools the town has is zoning.
No, I agree.
So there are other incentives, but those traditionally cost money, such as TIFs. There are plenty of towns that have proactively used financial incentives to accomplish strategic goals and objectives. It's not the norm, because most towns can't afford it, and it's also not politically viable. The towns that have done it are very successful. Marlborough is a good example. Burlington is a good example. But those communities, Marlborough in particular, did it proactively. Burlington, Waltham, Woburn, the market drove, said, in order for us to invest, $500 million, we need a TIF. We need some financial assistance.
I'm not suggesting we do anything different. I'm just suggesting that we tone down the expectations of what these overlays are intended for.
I completely agree with you on that.
And really talk about it more in terms of allowing the flexibility, allowing the ability to bring a number of different things in and at least get the proposals to us.
Right,
But
and that's
it's-
gotten lost. It's
Yeah.
gotten lost in the, as much as I've engaged with the planning board over the years, but I'm not going to, I would welcome the conversation like we're doing today and have the opportunity to kind of reset the table, which leads to then, resetting expectations, which is fine. I think that's needed. The community, I think, needs to be updated as to where we were, where we're going, and what happened in between. My hope is that that doesn't necessarily lead to, that the overlays in and of themselves were a problem. And I think that may be the disconnect, that people think that they were sold a story at town meeting, the overlays never implemented it. And then the worst case is, well, not only did the overlays not implement it, but whatever projects we got were exact opposite of what we wanted. And that, I'm not dismissing that to be not true. But as I mentioned, the initial strategy understood and acknowledged that we were not in a position to say no to anybody.
Yeah.
And I say that with, now hindsight being 20/20. It's not clear to me to what extent the town, however you want to define that, what their expectation is of the 6 million square feet of commercial industrial space down on 129. Back in the early 80s, mid-80s, it was the bread and butter of the CIP. 82% of the town's property value was commercial, 22% was commercial industrial. It's now down to like 17%. That speaks to depreciation and market trends with real estate. I always assumed that the town understood that the whole point of doing the overlays was to try to get that back to 22%. Allow as much private investment to occur without zoning being a traditional obstacle. That never has transpired, but more importantly, it's still not clear to me how the town truly relies on or expects. What does it want or expect from its 6 million of square feet down to 129 in the 8 million square feet commercial industrial town-wide? Which is it's not necessarily a zoning-centric discussion. but I've never heard anyone talk about that being a critical component of fiscal stability or prosperity. And it always puzzles me.
But I think if you were asking people what their vision of 129 is, I think the way it's described in the BAOD presentation is what people have envisioned. But I think the challenge is that how do we get there? And you can't just do it by zoning. In order to get that vision, the town would have to be a lot more proactive.
Right.
And if the one thing I brought up in the last meeting is that even if you have the overlay with that vision, unless you change the minimum underlaying zoning, you're still allowing some of that other underlying zoning to creep in, like the warehouses and the stuff like that, which could offset that vision. So I think people
Or
are...
undermine it.
That's what I meant, undermine it. So I think people's vision for 129 is pretty still accurate in the BAOD, but what we hear complaints about is when we allow projects with the underlying IA zoning. And I think that's the disconnect, is that if we brought up those standards, and maybe it's changing the underlying zoning in that area to remove some of those other uses that isn't compatible with the BAOD.
Yeah, and as I'm hearing you explain this, I think there's a way, again, 129 overlay was aspirational.
Mhm.
But it can still be implemented on a case-by-case basis, incremental basis, as opportunities,
Yes.
like you did with the applicability. That's going to take a lot of time.
Mhm.
And it's not a cohesive vision. That incremental implementation can be partnered by the town taking strategic investments. The piece where the town strategically assumed its role in the implementation, the beautification, the activation, was where we had transformative development projects or redevelopment projects, we would have been able to apply for state funding to do a lot of the beautification projects. Between the fact that the marketplace never was able to propose any transformative projects, and the notion of, during all this time, the town was quickly changing its attitude towards scope and scale of developments. I think the external messaging started changing.
Mm-hmm.
It went from a buzz to, what's going on. I'm hearing about wastewater, moratoriums. I'm hearing about, pushback on zoning approvals. So all of that was part of the changing dynamic with the marketplace. I think if the internal strategy is to kind of revisit the aspirational expectations, that makes sense, because I agree with you, the community, I think, is puzzled by what's going on or what has been going on. The strategy about going into the underlying zoning, I think you need to be really, really careful about that. I do, because the aspirational, not only the aspirational vision, but the aspirational uses don't appear to be coming to fruition. And then you're still challenged with those 5 or 6 dinosaurs.
Mhm.
And we still struggle with them. I mean, what the board approved probably isn't ideal, but without having definitive market data, my concern would be you wouldn't even get the proposal. And so I don't know to what extent the town can be patient. I've heard Anita say, the town can be patient. Well, if the town financially does not have any expectations for the square footage on 129, then I guess we can be patient. and go into the underlying zoning and delete uses that the town thinks are low value and wait. My point is there's been 2 or 3 real estate trends where it never made it to Chelmsford. Like, how long do you want to wait? So I mean, that's why I tie this back to what is the town's, setting aside aspirational visions. At the end of the day, the town decided to build 6 million square feet down there. And in the early 80s, it was a machine. Great employment, great tax base, it was a machine. Does the town strategically want to try to get back to that point? And if so, how do we do it? I just don't know if that's truly the expectation or not. Historically, and you've heard this from other planning board members, the planning board has never looked at zoning as creating winners or losers. It's always been about good planning. I kind of viewed the overlay as not only was it good planning, but it was a strategic attempt to acknowledge that there were some fundamental market challenges with the real estate down there. I just don't know to what extent that is a driving factor.
Would it make sense at all to look at another market study? So I'm not sure the cost of that, but for example, we all know market conditions change. Like to Evan's point about, financial incentives. You may remember a couple of years ago at town meeting, a very large semiconductor company that has a big presence in Chelmsford received 2 TIFs, and if my memory's right, town meeting passed it overwhelmingly and supported it, but it was more following the chip shortage after COVID. There was supposed to be this big movement to bring domestic production back, but then and then based on what I'm seeing, reading about stories, if it's been very minimal, it's come back, and if it does, it's probably headed to states outside New England.
Yeah, I mean,
So-
TSMC is doing a big move into
And the TIFs that Chelmsford's probably adopted, 10 or 12 TIFs over the last 20 years, they've all been very minor in scope and scale, and they haven't been tied to a transformative redevelopment, meaning the buildings look the same, the businesses are the same, so they're very small.
Campus.
Yeah, they weren't about tearing, buying up 2 or 3 properties and building a small, mini Third Ave. That's how some communities and developers will partner to do a transformative redevelopment. We haven't had that opportunity. That market study was a state grant. It was $125,000. So I don't think we'd get funded for that again.
Yeah.
That's why I'm suggesting that, maybe we bring in some stakeholders. We can, talk to the planning board. Maybe the planning board wants to invite some other community stakeholders. Maybe they're local brokers or local property owners. Maybe there's some out of town, and just get different perspectives. Like I said, the challenge for 129 has been, it's never been a clear, well-defined market. And even during the early 80s, if you look back at the types of businesses that were there, it was very, very diverse.
So
that-
how
so
come
what-
if there's only 5% vacancy, the percentage CIP has fallen from 22 to 17? I don't understand that.
It's fallen.
Residences have gone up.
Well, setting aside the residential market, let's just focus on the CIP.
Oh, yeah.
You've had lack of investment, which leads to higher depreciation. So back 10 years ago, the average depreciation was 30%.
What's it now?
I don't know, it's probably at least 30, if not higher. You had these white elephants, which literally, the property owner has struggled for at least a decade to figure out what to do with them. We seem to be turning that corner. Coming out of COVID, property owners, I think you've heard Sam Chase mention this, more property owners have filed for abatements because of the post-COVID effect, where the office buildings have less return on investment. So they're arguing that the properties are worth less. Some of that has been successful and some of it hasn't been successful. But remember, while Chelmsford's only 10 miles south of Burlington, 10 miles north of Burlington and 10 miles south of Nashua, that 10 miles makes it's a world of difference in the marketplace. Again, the trends that you see at 128 have never reached 129. And so it's just a variety of just unique circumstances. Again, it's not a master plan development. There's no one property owner that owns more than 10 acres. Very diversified.
Have you ever compared the Burlington zoning, underlying zoning versus our zoning at 129? And what's the difference and how they got attracted and why we're not being attracted?
The story of Burlington is all market-driven.
Right.
If you go back, the town fought them all.
I mean, there's some big
And then-
structures down there.
Oh, yeah.
So like. have
So
we
now
looked- have
the
we looked at
town,
height?
30 years later, the town has realized that that's their cash cow. And they've figured out that they can buffer or, buffer the
Residences.
rest of the residential neighborhoods,
Right.
kind of like 129 is. It's set up in a similar fashion with the exception of the hard line along Turnpike and Mill. But much of 129 is isolated. But it took Burlington 30 years before they figured out, that the marketplace, the pressure and demand of the marketplace and the value that it brought to the point where Burlington now does routine zoning changes proactively to accommodate multi-story biotech. They're going, you see it on 128, they tear down a 4-story building that was only built, 20 years ago, and they put up a 6-story building. So the market's just completely different. So it's difficult to compare companies that want to be in Burlington don't necessarily want to be in Chelmsford. And if they do want to be in Chelmsford, it's likely for secondary operations. And then you're left with, the big final statement is, even if property owners in the town wanted to retain the 3 to 5 white elephants as office use, how many 100,000 square foot plus office users are actually in the market, never mind looking at 495? So that's why I refer to it as functionally obsolete. There's no viable uses for those large office buildings. And then where you have a limitation on wastewater, you can't bring in a lot of biotech, life science companies, even if they want to be here. So finding out, what is our place in the marketplace takes time and effort. Our strategy was, we couldn't get any definitive answer. We're going to be everything to everybody. And that's exactly how it played out.
Okay.
But I like Chris's idea of at least making an attempt to go back into the community and explain, what has happened, why it's happened. Maybe suggest that, it's good to be aspirational, but this is a more realistic resetting of the table. Maybe that's tied to the strategic plan, maybe that's one of the goals. I did articulate in my meeting, we had a staff meeting today about strategic planning with the consultant. And I did articulate one of the objectives of the board, revisiting, reviewing the overlays. So I think whatever the board decides as next steps out of this makes sense, and even the notion of the board going back into the community and presenting and trying to get feedback on a vision, whether it's aspirational or realistic, could be worthwhile. But again, to me, at the end of the day, it really comes down to, how does the town view the 6 million square feet, and what is the town's expectation? Warehousing isn't, it's the lowest common denominator, but is it a better option than letting a building, remain vacant for an extended period of time? Which speaks to, higher depreciation and incremental decline in the CIP values.
Should we table this?
Should we what?
Should we table this for now?
Yeah.
Because we're hitting the 9
I think we made good progress. I have a better understanding. I had never heard it expressed the way Chris has expressed it to me. I knew that there was a disconnect, but I was never able to, no one
Figure on it.
articulated it to me.
Yeah. Well, okay, so before we move along, I mean, what do we take from this and where do we want to take next steps?
Yeah.
I mean, do we want to try and bring in stakeholders and kind of reimagine what does the community want?
Evan, why wouldn't we bring in like Colliers or?
We can.
Big, there's some major real estate.
We can, and they've
people that
all,
handle this
they've
area.
all been marketing, they've all have marketed properties down to 129 over the last 10 years. So they're,
And get some feedback to this board, just like what,
I can make the invite, we can invite existing property owners. You've met many of them as they've come before you, small, medium, and large.
Maybe even inviting Sal Lupoli is another
Yeah.
voice from the.
And I can tell you, I mean, during COVID, he inquired. But it's, when he found out about the soil limitations and having to build a on-site wastewater treatment plant,
so I just
Yeah,
want to ask a
those are
question
all
about
great
that.
stakeholders.
I just want to, you've mentioned it multiple times, right? So what is the latest with the sewer impact in the town and the future of a sewer plant?
yeah, so the short-term strategy is DPW actively identifies areas where there's inflow and infiltration into the system.
Right.
The most recent example is they've been targeting manholes,
Yeah.
and they've been inspecting manholes, and I think most recently they found 200 manholes that have I&I, and what they'll do is they'll physically go in and repair those manholes, and there's a national standard that where they can calculate the amount of inflow per minute, the gallons per minute of inflow. And then they make the repair, and then they can take that gallons per minute as a credit. That credit goes into the credit bank, which is available for purchase. So on average, over the last 2 or 3 years, while this program's been in operation, we've been averaging about 18 to 22,000 gallons of capacity needed to accommodate trends continued with development.
Per year?
Yeah, per year. So if you look at the past 2-3 years of planning board approvals, it's been averaging about 18 to 22,000 gallons of new capacity needed. The program that DPW is running is keeping up with historical trends. Where it falls flat from a strategy perspective is, God forbid you had a biotech company knock on the door tomorrow. We literally cannot accommodate you.
So that pretty much rules out any major redevelopment
So that's
project.
aspirational or
Transformational.
transformative,
Let's
aspirational.
transform it to residential, single-family then. If we don't have the capacity for sewer, and you're saying that, like,
Well, even,
You mean with
You-
septic?
you could do that, but even low-value CIP warehousing at least provides CIP value, because otherwise, if you transition it all to single-family, they'll build it. We know that they'll build it.
and you get more money out of it versus a warehouse. Like, all you have to do is.
I don't know that to be the case.
I did the math the last time when we were doing the whole, and I spoke to the assessors, and we did the math on warehouses. If you look at something like, yeah.
Well, maybe we
This
can get
is-
Sam
this-
to come. Let's get
this is-
Sam to come
And I
too.
agree. This is why I asked,
Maybe
to
we.
what extent does the town value its CIP? It may turn out that the town doesn't value it at all. I mean, to your point, if
Like,
the
you're gonna have to have a
assessors and other
bunch of-
people believe that
Like
10 acres of single family is valuable and worth more to the town than one warehouse, then maybe the strategy is, maybe we got to reposition our
That's
strategy.
what you're, if we're saying that, I mean. the
But
fact
even
that
residential right now is a problem because of sewer.
These are
Well,
hooked
they'd have
up.
to have septic.
No, these are already, but these properties already have a flow going into them.
Yeah,
So-
it wouldn't necessarily be a
Septic.
wastewater limitation. I think the concern there would be the town would proactively be rezoning to eliminate commercial industrial land and strategically want to replace it with single family.
Yeah. As long as you don't do like multifamily
Because,
or.
I mean, the concern with single family is that it doesn't necessarily pay its own way, doesn't cover its own costs if you have children.
It'd be too expensive to take the buildings down to put a neighborhood in.
Right. Multifamily, on the other hand,
A
generally speaking, it's cash positive.
For the
I
town,
mean,
Yeah.
considering that we went from what?
It's not a cash
15%
cow,
To 5%?
But it's
but
slightly
it's
cash positive.
neutral or
Yeah,
cash, yeah.
yeah.
Well, I mean, we should talk to the assessor and maybe
You want to start with the assessors and then work our way from there? You want me to reach out to some commercial brokers, property
Yeah.
owners? Okay. And certainly if you have any lists, send them to me. If you know someone at,
I can give you a couple of names
yeah,
that are from the Boston firms that are.
yeah.
Okay, so maybe
Excellent.
we'll do that in January?
Yeah, I'll get started on it, absolutely. Thank you, it's been very beneficial for me.
The other thing we were gonna talk about, not on this meeting, but that we were thinking about for Springtown meeting, which is getting kinda close, was rezoning Kate's Corner.
Yeah.
Did we want to maybe put that in for a meeting and
Yeah, probably.
maybe
for
do it
next-
like just
Yeah.
I mean, it's not a lot of space down there, so it ought to be a fairly easy conversation relative to some of the other ones we've got.
And maybe we could
Invite-
invite some of the neighbors to
come?
come
event.
Would that
and,
be December 11th?
no. I think that, I don't know, do you think we have time for that on December
You
11th?
got the ADU, OSRP thing, the cannabis discussion.
So then we're looking at January?
Yeah,
Yeah, I mean, if the board's going to prioritize trying to get ADU, assuming the state guidelines come out, and get ADU wrapped up with a special town meeting, I mean, that may take your 2 meetings, whatever extra time you have.
But
and I'm not
we
coming on
wouldn't be
Christmas.
working with the state guidelines. We'd be working just with the basic stuff for the special town
The
meeting.
the guidelines may define what the basics are, may change what you think the basics
Well,
are.
let's,
Yeah, but I think.
We don't
should-
know.
well,
I just don't know to what extent you're going to be able to prioritize ADU between now and February or April. We've got floodplain, which isn't a major lift. I think Kate's Corner is very doable for Springtown meeting.
So let's do that. When's the warrant
Just
for
don't know if
Springtown
January
meeting?
is-
February,
Want to try to target your second meeting in January 22nd,
no, let's do the first.
first for Kate's Corner? Okay.
But can we send out letters to the butters?
I
The
can, yeah.
butters, I mean, what if we
Like-
post things in the neighborhood or something?
Well, I'll do a direct mailing, that's
Let's do
fine.
a direct mailing.
Just
That
tell
way-
me how, if someone could kind of just draw a circle for me. I don't know how far we want to
There's
extend this.
what's the district IA? That's, right now it's listed as IA.
Yep.
That's what we're trying to change.
Mm-hmm.
So I would
That's
do the,
Lockheed.
right, let's,
Lockheed Martin, yeah.
yeah, let's do,
Okay,
what we
so
do
that-
standard of butters, because I'm sure they'll tell other people.
Okay, so I'll do a direct mailing inviting them to the January 8th Planning Board meeting to have a conversation about zoning, planning, land use.
And there's two different commercial zones there too, where it seems like
Yeah,
they're
the
a little-
CA, there's IA.
CB, I thought too. And
Probably
I thought,
CB, yeah.
and I thought the
Yeah, it's a little
roadside one
strange.
was inland and the one that wasn't roadside was actually on the roadside, so.
So they're closing, right, that place, did they
They
close?
closed
think
last
Maxwell's
week.
has closed.
Did anyone buy it? No.
No,
Okay.
No.
Oh, so they just went forward and closed, so they still own the property.
I'm sorry.
They
can't
still own the property?
Yes.
It's closed.
All right, so next up, are we leaving the BAD and the zoning schedule behind for the moment? We have MBTA. So I was at the select board meeting on Monday, and I'm still a little confused, but my understanding is that the hitch is the development agreement, which is not our development agreement, and that's where most of the problem is, according to the Attorney General's letter.
Did they pass the new agreement?
No, because there's some kind of an issue with, I guess, Trammell Crow has changed their name, and a smaller part of Trammell Crow, which is a distinct, I think, subset of investors, is now the one that's owning that property. So it's not technically a change from what they said, that they would keep it in Trammell Crow and stay for at least 5 years, but the name changed. So because the name changed and some of the individuals changed, some of the individuals aren't happy about, I don't know, somebody described it as, people are saying, if I'm going to sign my name, what am I going to get for it? Why am I accepting this? So Mark, the guy that was here for everything, apparently thinks he's going to get it all ironed out in the next 2 weeks, and that will give them enough time to approve it by the end of the year. And so they asked, Mark and Paul Cohen asked for patience. There's just one remaining sticking item that they think they'll work out in the next 2
So
weeks.
there's not really much we can do about it.
Nothing that we can
Yeah.
do about it.
All right, so.
And am I incorrect in that that's the,
That's a fair general
I mean,
summary
is
of.
that the case that that's the main problem with our with our general, from the attorney?
So the,
I don't know where that is.
yeah, so I mean, as you recall, that's not part of this letter or this agenda item. There were two letters. One was the
Right.
HLC review
Right,
of the MBTA zoning, which identified the need to modify development agreements. What's on the agenda tonight is the Attorney General's review and approval of the actual zoning article.
Good.
So they're two separate and distinct legal reviews. What you were referring to was in the HLC review
right.
related to the development
So
agreement.
what is our action pertaining to the Attorney General's letter tonight? We have to,
I would propose that we have our town council review the Attorney General's,
well, they have.
no, they haven't.
They indicated that they would. That has not formally been circulated to the board. I'm not aware that they have submitted a review and recommendation. So that we can certainly do.
Well, I don't think we can take any action until we have that.
All right,
Correct. So I think we'd need them to review the Attorney General's recommendations and see where there might be conflicts that would bring us out of compliance with the Section 3A requirements. And if there are any areas, they can recommend some modifications.
Remedies.
And until that happens, we really can't do anything.
Do we think we could get that by the next meeting? Because,
Should be able to.
okay,
But based on what I read in the letter, it didn't seem like that was necessarily going to impact our
compliance.
compliance standing directly with the housing office. It might impact potential issues down the road if our bylaws are challenged or if anything happens.
I agree. There's no indication that there's a direct correlation between HLC's final compliance review and the Attorney General's letter. That's not to say that the HLC doesn't obtain a copy of it and say, hey, we want you to also
Yeah.
make these revisions. The town's strategy and intent is, prior to December 31st, regardless of the status of the development agreements or this letter, we are going to submit the package as we have it. And they'll be required to spend the time to review it and then notify us of compliance status. What happens if they come back and say, well, you're not in compliance? My expectation is that there's interim timeframes and steps that would be required.
But it would be good if we can get this reviewed sooner rather than later, so that if there is some changes, we can bring it to Springtown meeting.
And in the time frame in between, when those steps were being taken, we wouldn't be out of compliance, we would be working towards compliance. Right?
I think it's just a play on words. I mean, again, I don't get the sense that the state's going to be taking towns that are that have adopted and are attempting to comply. You know, the DA thing's a unique situation. If it's not resolved, clearly the record shows that the town has made all reasonable attempts. And then this one here, you know, we have documentation when council was reviewing and advising the board that we covered, we wrote it to cover ourselves to be compliant.
Right.
So I don't view these as, you know, obvious non-compliant issues.
Yeah.
Okay, but I will circle with council and request that they provide a written response for your December 11th meeting.
Thank you.
I make a motion to adjourn our
Second.
meeting.
We need to adjourn?
All in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Yeah.
We need to adjourn?